Okay, ethics. This is lecture 3, and we're continuing on with fundamentals. And today, I think it's a pretty eye-opening kind of lecture. And the topic is evaluating moral arguments. And really, yes, moral arguments, but any argument in particular. So we want to know what is an argument? What constitutes an argument? Is it just people angry at each other, screaming at each other? No. So you want to make a point, and you want to make a valid point, and you have reasons for what you believe, or reasons to justify what you've done, or maybe what you hope to do, something like that. And you have all these reasons in your mind, and you start spewing forth all these reasons to someone, and you do it quite frantically because you're all excited about this thing that you're going to do, or this that you believe, but then you don't understand why the other person is having trouble following you and having trouble seeing things the way that you do, or understanding how you're justifying what you've done or what you believe, or all these kinds of things. We've all been there, and it can be extremely frustrating. Something is so clear to you, and yet other people just can't grab a hold of it. And some of that is, quite frankly, on us, because we've really not provided the reasons for what we believe, or the reasons for justifying what we've done or what we hope to do. We've not done that in a proper sequence, and have sort of slowed things down such that every stated reason is accompanied by some kind of evidence. Imagine a court of law, and you want someone defending you. You've been accused of something, and you want someone defending you who doesn't give any evidence, or who basically doesn't interpret the evidence that exists in a way that's favorable to you, something like that, or your position, hence your defense. So I think this is really a great subject, and we have a lot of ground to cover, so I want to move through it fairly quickly. I don't expect you all just to be expert at developing arguments. It can be quite difficult, but I do want you to be aware that along with having a moral or ethical position about something, that you have to apply a certain amount of moral reasoning to that. And arguments help us to craft or frame what we believe in a way that is truthful, it is logical, and it's evidential. I mean, just think of that, truthful, because we want to live by what's true, not by what's false. Logical, it has to make sense, and evidential, that whatever we believe is true, how do you actually know that it is true? And so it isn't just any kind of evidence, but evidence that supports that, that statement, what you've said. Where's the evidence for that? Okay, I'm with you so far. Now what's the next thing? Okay, I see how that logically follows. But where's the evidence for that? Imagine that you have a certain conclusion, something that you believe, and then you have a series of statements that you believe would be sufficient enough for a person to accept that belief for themselves. But with each statement, that statement has to be supported by reasons, in other words. And those reasons supported by good evidence, and good evidence is truthful evidence, factual evidence, not just any evidence, not just saying, here I've thrown together a bunch of evidence. Maybe it's good evidence, maybe it's not, and so on. All this goes into arguments. And so I'm just working through the PowerPoint as you have it, and I want you to notice I'm on this slide that has moral reason, critical reasoning, things like this on there. So moral reasoning, now what is that? It's ordinary critical reasoning, but that's applied to ethics. Hence we're dealing with a moral issue. In other words, we're dealing with what one should do or what one ought to do. So how do we reason through that? Critical reasoning or critical thinking, it's just the careful, systematic evaluation of statements or claims, okay? That should be self-evident what that means, but critical reasoning doesn't just mean I'm just critical about everything. You know, we use the word critical often in a negative way, but this is just in a positive way. You're reading a book, you know, let's say, whatever the book is, and the author of that book is really what they're doing, whether they know it or not. They're trying to motivate you, influence you to their particular point of view. And they may give evidence in support of their view, they may not. The book may be totally biased. And as a matter of fact, if you look at journalism today or look at the news media, which is so reputed to be, you know, fake news, right? You've heard this for now, you know, so many years. It's become just a common phrase. And we say that because it does not appear that there's been any kind of critical thinking. And in critical thinking, you're basically saying, not just, this is the view because we said so, or this is the view, look at our evidence, but we failed to show you another view that is also supported by evidence. So how do we look critically at both views, at both sets of reasons, both sets of statements, both sets of evidence to determine which one is the correct one? And you say, yes, where is that news channel? Where is that news outlet? Where are those people, right? And so you need to really, you know, maybe consider this subject today very carefully, because it's going to impact your watching of news, your reading of news outlets, your reading of blogs, your reading of web pages, your reading of various books, where the author is not going to tell you up front, I'm a social progressive or I'm a conservative, or even if they do, it's for you to determine by what they say, are they in fact that? So, you know, as I said earlier on about the textbook, one of the textbooks, this is an atheist who's the author, but that doesn't follow that they're wrong about everything. But certainly it does kind of influence how they characterize certain biblical themes, biblical passages. Why? Because they're not an insider. They are not a believer. They're looking at it from the outside with kind of unregenerate eyes a lot of times, and they could point up things that appear to be inconsistencies to them, but are certainly not inconsistent to us, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. So we use critical reasoning every day, no question. We determine whether a statement is worthy of acceptance or not, you know, because we're saying, I don't know, can it be proven to be true? Is it true or not? And we want to arrive at the truth with regard to all kinds of claims. And people make a lot of claims. Individuals make claims about themselves, you know, whether personal, professional, academic, philosophical, science, the whole range of it, political, ethical, all kinds of claims out there. What's a claim? It's just somebody stating something as fact. Well, whether it is or not, well, that's going to be up to you, and you're determining that by the reasons they provide, if they're stating a series of facts and drawing a conclusion, or the evidence that they've provided. Is it good evidence? Is it all just skewed one way? Or, and this is just a little hint, and I'm not asking you to do this per se, but if I'm in a situation asking students to do a true research paper, what am I expecting in that? I'm not expecting that in a true research paper, you propose a thesis. There's a thesis, methodology. Here's the thesis. And I'm basically asking in the thesis, what is it that you intend to prove? And then in the methodology, how is it that you will prove that case? In what way? And you say, well, I am going to research various literature, both pro and con. I'm going to evaluate the evidence for or against and so on. And then to the best of my ability, apply critical reasoning and render a conclusion. It may be incomplete, it may be weak, based upon the kind of evidence that you could find, depending on the kind of research, but nonetheless, that's a true research paper. But if one of you hand in the paper and it says, well, here's my thesis, and I went to the library, digital, whatever. You use the digital media online, all of the databases, you did a search, and all you did was in your bibliography cite a bunch of sources that agree with you. So you started not with really a thesis, but you started with a conclusion, and you lined up all the people that agree with you and managed to eliminate anyone who didn't agree with you. So you never really did look at the opposition to see if your point of view or your conclusion or your thesis is really worth anything or not. And I find that many people, in the sense of moral arguments, our topic today, many people begin and end with not a theory or a thesis or an argument, but just with a preference. I prefer that it be this way, therefore I close my ears to any opposing point of view. See, we shouldn't be like that as Christians. So one thing we never fear as Christians is that the Bible could ever be proven wrong. It never has. It never will, because it's God's Word and it's truthful. Well, we sometimes just proceed on that kind of moral high ground without any justification for what we do or what we believe, other than we prefer that it be this way. We don't want to be that way. That presents the Christian gospel. It presents the veracity or truthfulness of God's Word. It presents the existence of an all-loving, omnipotent, omniscient God as someone that we just believe because we prefer to rather than not. And what we're saying basically is there's no evidence for any of it, otherwise we'd give it to you. That seems to be what many people think of Christian belief. And of course, that's 100%, 180 degrees away from anything that we believe. It's how we present ourselves. So let's go quickly through here, but also at the same time, let's recognize how important this is. I, as a Christian, want to present my faith. I want to present my beliefs. I want to present my moral values, my moral positions in such a way that it's truthful, it's logical, and it's evidential. And thankfully we can. Thankfully we as Christians are at no loss for evidence. Evidence is everywhere. Evidence is everywhere. All right, so we want to start with something really, really simple. Like what is a statement? And of course, I have given you the PDF of the corresponding text that goes with much of the PowerPoint. I'm going to fill those places in for you as we walk through this, as we talk through this. So note, this is part 2 of moral reasoning, and I believe it's chapter 3. But what is a statement? So a statement is an assertion that something is or is not the case. Well, that's a shocker, right? But it's important to know. Sometimes we call it a proposition or a propositional truth. It simply means that whatever is stated in such a way that it can be determined whether it is or is not the case. It can be affirmed or denied. So this can be factual, something factual, and I think we have some examples given here in terms of the ship sailed on the wind-tossed sea, or I feel tired and listless. I mean, they're just statements, but they can be factual in terms of 5 plus 5 equals 10. That's either true or it's not true. A moral statement, murder is wrong. That's either true or it's not true. Or something observational, like the sky is blue, or appears to be blue. That's either true or not true. It's important. Why? Because anything that someone says in a statement form or in a propositional form, a statement form, it sort of includes a claim that this is so or is not so. And you're saying, you have to first, instead of just accepting it out of hand, because, well, I know the person, they're a good person. Okay, so they're a good person, therefore everything they say is true? Maybe they're just passing along something that they've heard. Maybe they are a good person, so to speak, moral, ethical, all of that, wonderful friend. But how do you know then what they're saying? Based on what evidence, right? Based on what evidence? So every statement you're thinking, really? Should I buy that? Should I swallow that? Wait a minute. And we begin to be people who apply critical reasoning. I say maybe it is true, but I would like some proof or some evidence for that. Things that are not statements, a whole list of those. Hand me the screwdriver. Well, that's not a statement that we need to affirm or deny. So not everything is a statement. So a fundamental principle of critical reasoning, and we've been talking about it for the last few minutes a little bit, is that we don't accept any statement without good reasons. And then we have to say, what are the good reasons? And the good reasons are not just because I'm hearing it from some person in authority like me. And I don't mean authority in terms of governing your life. I mean authority in terms of someone with an earned PhD, so therefore they've attained the highest level in their field. They're technically an expert in their field and all these things. Does that mean, okay, everything he says then must be true? And because some guy wrote some book on ethics, everything it says is automatically true? No, of course not. And there are always places to be challenged and to say, well, I hear what you're saying. And usually from a student's perspective, they'd say, well, who am I? I don't even have an undergraduate degree, and I'm going to apply critical thinking to something a PhD said. And certainly, why not? Why not do that? But here's the kicker, and I've had this happen, it happens a few times in the classroom because it usually ends in an embarrassment on the part of the student. And it's not because they're foolish, but it's because of their approach. For example, if a student were to challenge me in the classroom and say, oh, professor, respectfully, I have to disagree. I'm all ears. I'm ready. I'm all ears. You know why? Because I'm saying, this is awesome. They're actually applying critical reasoning. Great. Well, here are my reasons, and here's the conclusion that I've drawn based on my reasons. Here's the evidence going along with my reasons. So I'm all ears. I'm all ears. Give me your reasons and give me the evidence that support your reasons and your counter offer, your counter conclusion. And this is to the benefit of the entire class, just to see this process go forward. Maybe the student, and I've done this in secular classrooms as well, laid out my premises, we'll get there in a second, and my conclusion, and laid out theirs and their conclusion, whatever the ethical issue is. And then to say, okay, help me out. Please, help me out. Can you find some weaknesses in my premises, in my statements? Can you find some weakness? Maybe the evidence doesn't exactly fit my statement. Maybe there's some, because why? I want to strengthen it. I either want to strengthen my argument or I want to change my argument. Right? So, why? Because I want the truth. So what would happen if, in the course of all this discussion back and forth, and in the classroom like this, and the student says, yeah, I respectfully, whatever. And they actually have some, and I said, that's interesting. I really hadn't thought about it in that perspective, so that is interesting. What if I modified then my view to include what you're saying, and that merely just strengthens one's, because after all, you're not looking at what you prefer, and just to line up any kind of evidence that supports what you prefer. You want what is true. Now, for a lot of times the student's not prepared for that, and I'm not trying to embarrass anyone, and they're disagreeing not based on the evidence, but they're disagreeing based on the preference. Do you see the difference? Right? So I could come to a conclusion. Here are my statements, my reasons, my evidence, so on. Conclusion. Boom. There it is. I don't like that conclusion. I would rather it be this way. But rather it be this way, if it's not truthful, if it's based on some fantasy or some preference, then you're living a lie, in essence. And no one wants to do that. So I think this is it's just such a great exercise, but it begins here. Don't state anything you can't prove unless you preface that with, now I'm not really sure about this, but I've heard this, or I think this, and I would like to research this out, but research it properly. But neither do you just accept something from someone without good reasons, and good reasons are those things that are supported by evidence. Okay? So our acceptance can vary in strength, For example, you might entertain the statement, okay, that's something to think about, but I'm sort of tepid. I'm just going to dip my toe in the water, not sure I want to plunge all in on this. I haven't heard enough to be convinced. So if a statement is supported by strong reasons, we're entitled to believe it then strongly. But if the reasons are weak, then no, I wouldn't even want to use the word belief in this context. But if the reasons are equivocal, if they don't help us decide